Savvy Young Professional podcast. My name is Tanida Mullen, and in this episode, we are going to talk about the use of the English language. This was a really fun show to record, and I'm so happy that you get a chance to listen to it, because what you're going to learn is what words are good to use and at what times, how to really expand your vocabulary. And for me, especially as an avid reader, this one was really fun to record. So make sure you stay tuned, and I'll catch you on the other side. Welcome to the podcast, David. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. I'm a communications entrepreneur and a former journalist. I'm 53 years old, and I live in Arlington, Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C.
So tell me a little bit about what you do as it relates to a language.
Well, I first started falling in love with English as a small child, and when I read very early, and I had an eagerness about words, an eagerness about language. I'm one of the people that had very high English scores from grammar school and deeply mediocre math scores, so I was always fairly lopsided that way. And I came along to found the Wordsmith Academy when I began to notice how much of my own vocabulary was diminishing as time went on, and I found that there was a lot of research about people losing their vocabulary as they grow older. And so I thought that the Wordsmith Academy would be a way for people to keep their language skills honed, keep them sharp, and as well as helping them communicate better and hopefully make the world a better place by people communicating more evenly, I suppose.
So you founded the Wordsmith Academy, and I think that's such an interesting concept. And we had a conversation before this interview, and I just kind of got lost in just the idea of what that really meant. So, explain to the audience what exactly you would consider a wordsmith.
A wordsmith is a person who can use language precisely and creatively to get his or her point across and to help and to engage the listener or the reader in some kind of either vision or plan or story or discussion. Obviously, communication there's many different things you can do with it. So it would it's not any one goal, but whatever goal the wordsmith has, a wordsmith is able to use the language in a clear and precise way to help that person come along with them into that vision, into whatever end goal that the wordsmith wants.
And I know that's a pretty strong description when I hear wordsmith, when I hear someone describe someone as that. When I think about the young professional, I don't know if wordsmith always comes to mind automatically. So do you think that there is a gap in how we use language as young professionals or just professionals in general? Or have you seen people have more of an interest in using language as kind of a way to paint the pictures of what they're saying?
I think it's a bit of both. There is definitely a gap. I mean, it's not just a gap with young professionals; it's a gap generally. Our language skills have generally diminished, I would argue, over the last 50 years or so. I can point to surveys of average vocabulary that, say, 14 and 18-year-olds knew in 1950 compared to the vocabulary that they know today. And I'm not saying this to say, oh, how great life was or whatever. I'm not one of these people. I'm not like the old guy shouting, "Get off my lawn." But there has definitely been a slide in our tools, in our vocabulary tools. And I think that's been to our detriment. I don't think being a wordsmith is shut off to anybody. I think young professionals of any age really can be wordsmiths, can become wordsmiths. I think the people, at my age and older, and my age and younger can do it. It's not a mystery. It's just I think the gap exists though, and I think that particularly now, if you are a wordsmith, you'll stand out. If you use the language in a way that you know what you're doing and you can use it in a creative, engaging way, people are going to notice. And that's the kind of thing that young professionals, I think in particular, would find very attractive.
Interesting. Where do you think, or why do you think, that we have kind of slacked off in using words in our best way possible? How did we get here?
Well, we got here, I'm afraid, by a number of different reasons. First, people read less generally than they did 25 or 30 years ago, and reading. As much as I love the Wordsmith Academy, and I do love the Wordsmith Academy, and it's my baby, I created it. I'll tell people that the best way to expand your vocabulary is to read. It's free. Particularly if you use the library, it's free. It doesn't matter if you're reading on a screen or if you're reading on a paper book. As a matter of fact, Kindles can be even better for this because they. With the Kindle, you've got that little part of the Kindle that lets you tap a word and see a definition. That can be very easy. But people just don't read enough. And reading takes up time. And that's what the Wordsmith Academy lets people do. If you're not going to be able to read, then we recommend the Wordsmith Academy as a next way to build up your vocabulary. Because we engage creativity in helping you remember words. That's the key thing. We offer a word of the day service called This Morning's Word, but really that's just for people who are in love with language. They want to know the history of words. They want to know what curious words that might be around. But they're not to really learn vocabulary. You need to use creativity. Creativity provides like the cement for keeping the words in your head. If you just read them during a word of the day, you're probably going to forget them by the end of the day.
So you would say that reading is probably the number one reason why we've kind of moved away from using language as kind of a step up, or maybe something that can differentiate you from the rest of the crowd. And before we go a little further, I kind of want you to backtrack a little bit and explain to everybody what exactly the Wordsmith Academy is.
Okay, the Wordsmith Academy is a service. It's a series of lessons that help people expand their vocabulary and grow their use of words and grow the number of words they know and learn how not just to know the words, but learn how to use the words in a way that is creative and intelligent and won't just sound like you're just, spitting words out of a thesaurus or something. What we do is when you sign on with the Wordsmith Academy, we will give you a little introductory quiz that will sort of help give you an idea and us an idea of sort of where you are with vocabulary. And then we will send you lessons of words, usually lists of 16 or so words. We'll ask you to definitely look them up and define them. How you do that's up to you. You can do that online. You can do that through if you have a favorite, book, you can use a book dictionary. The only thing we'll say is that if you do it online, please try to choose a reputable website to do it on and one that's recent. Also, if you're using a book, to do a book that's been published within the last 5 years or so. And then what we ask you to do is use those words, those 16 words, in a sentence. Not a sentence, but in a creative project. It can be a essay, it can be a story, it can be a poem, a speech. I'm a member of Toastmasters, and when I was first starting out, a number of the test projects I did to sort of test the idea were speeches I was giving in Toastmasters. Anything you want to. You can use the project should be between probably 500 and 700 words, and you want to try to get to where you're using all the words, and so it's good to let your creativity go and play, because sometimes you have to do that to make all the words fit. I think we had one of our early test people, or early beta testers for the project, for the business. They gave us a football game, the story of a football game told from the point of view of the football. In other words, the story was it was a funny little snippet of a story, but the whole thing was about a football game, but from the football's point of view. And because that was the only way they could get all the words to come in, and it was hilarious. It was great. It was very creative.
Wow. So basically, this service allows you to use all of the tools that it takes to kind of work your brain and work through using words versus just only reading or only writing. There's a mixture of different things that you can do to kind of really let the information sink in and also exercise those use of words.
That's right, and it's the exercise of doing that. It's the exercise of finding a way to have the word fit in your story. That is what will make you remember that word 6 months, 9 months, 2 years down the line. The people who do this kind of learning, in terms of vocabulary, have much higher retention scores than anybody else.
Interesting. I like that. And I think it's something that, I love activities that can actually help, and they're not boring, and, that they change. I love that about that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the Wordsmith Academy a little later. I just wanted to make sure that people understood what it was before, we moved on, because I know we keep saying Wordsmith Academy. Right. So, we talked about, in the beginning of our interview, you said that, having a vocabulary can really, a more extensive vocabulary can really set you apart, especially as you being a young professional, or if you're out there trying to gain some kind of notoriety in maybe your career field or in business. So tell me exactly, or give me an example, I guess, of how that can actually work. For instance, maybe how can a young professional on demand pull up the words or use the words to help them to separate themselves?
Okay. I don't believe anybody's ever going to come up to anybody, a professional of any age, and give you a vocabulary quiz right on the spot, like in their office or some kind of just tell me what that word is. I think where you'll notice it is when you're in conversation with people in a meeting, maybe, or in a interview, in a presentation, and where previously you might have been very tongue-tied and reticent about speaking up or saying anything because you weren't sure what you wanted to say, or but you weren't sure you were using the right words, or you might make a mistake. Now you might be the person who raises their hand right away or speaks up right away and says, "Hey, I don't think this project would work because it's not very whatever. It's not very auditory." For example, if it was about sound, or basically it's having the words you would want at that moment. Because people don't understand that words have personalities. In English, particularly, other languages I'm not as sure about. The only other language I speak is Spanish, but words in English definitely have personalities. For example, lie and prevaricate. Okay, those are two words in English that both mean the same thing. They mean to tell an untruth. A lie is in my opinion, a very sort of bold, don't mess with me, bruiser kind of word. Okay, it's the kind of word that you might use if you were in a good cop bad cop situation. Lie would be the bad cop with the suspect. Don't lie to me. Prevaricate means the same thing as lie, but prevaricate is like a very high-toned, upper-class, suit-wearing, martini-drinking kind of word. It's a very sophisticated word. It's the word you would use if you want to get the same that the good cop might use to get the same result out of the suspect, but just, sweet talking or quieter or, more civilized sounding. Just, Mr. Jones or Ms. Smith, please don't prevaricate. Versus don't lie to me. You see what I'm saying? The difference?
Absolutely. I see that. And I love the way that you said that the words have their own personalities, because I can definitely see lie being kind of a bold and, just like you described it pretty much, more of a bold word. And
think of, for example, Tanida walked down the street. There's a sentence, a good English sentence. Tanida walked down the street. All right, to think of how that sentence is different if I said Tanida strolled down the street. Or if I said Tanida trudged down the street. Or if I said Tanida sauntered down the street. Every one of those different words mean the same thing. She walked down the street. But they all convey different shades and personalities and subtext to what she did. If you're strolling, maybe you're on your way back to work. You're not really, you're just thinking about something else. You're just enjoying yourself. If you trudge down the street, maybe you've had bad news. Maybe it's been a hard day. Maybe you're tired, that you trudge along. If you saunter, saunter is sort of being chipper and aware and kind of looking around you and seeing who's there and eager to talk to people. Each one of those has got a different set of meanings to it besides just walk, even though they mean walk.
Right. I love that. I think that's a perfect way to describe that, especially when you're talking to people who are past the learning in school age. I think to really put an emphasis on the importance of using different words, that's the best way to do it, to tell that story and to dress the words up and to give the words their own personality and meaning. And I think as an adult, it's a little bit easier to process that than saying, you just need to up your vocabulary. I think when people hear that, typically they don't know where to start and they don't even know what that even means. Right. So I love the way that you put that. So I'm going to ask you a question, and this kind of is more to me because I know I normally have questions for my guests, but when we had our talk before and just you using examples again, I have different words that I use all the time. And I always wonder, because there are words that I could replace those words with, but they need to be words that I can use in my daily vocabulary. Because you mentioned that these are not words that you might use every single day or for every occasion. So one word or two words that I use all the time are awesome and absolutely. You can hear in my interviews, and people have told me this, mostly my family and my friends, they say, you say absolutely a lot in your interviews. And I didn't really notice it until I went back and I listened to them. So what are some of those, those two words being examples? They're more filler words, obviously, but how does someone take on getting rid of filler words? And can you find better filler words?
Yes, but the thing about filler words is the reason why absolutely and awesome are such good filler words is because they can be fit into so many different sentences. It's like so, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And to have replacements for them, you're gonna need to have a broader selection of words because your replacement words are probably not going to fill in exactly as easily as awesome and absolutely do. You would want words to fill in that would sort of tie into what you were just told. if someone just told you about a new way of cooking something, for example, you, instead of saying awesome or absolutely, you might say that's exactly right, or that's exactly what I thought, or that sounds delicious. You know, in other words, but it's having the words that you want it's like having the tools that you want on the table in front of you instead of having to go reach and rummage them through a bag to find them. That's the difference.
So basically what you're saying is building that vocabulary will cause you to not use so many filler words because you will just have the right words to say to fit the moment just because your vocabulary is now built up, or you just have a better vocabulary than before.
You'll have the tools to avoid the filler words, but it's still going to take a little work to stop using them because a lot of them are habit. And I know about filler words because Toastmasters, we actually have somebody in each Toastmasters meeting called the ah counter, and that's what they do. They count the ahs, whatever they count the filler words in your speech, and they'll tell you what they are at the end. And so it's these things are not. You'll have the tools to be able to stop using them. It's still going to take some work and some thought to stop using them because they're like I said, they're habitual.
Right. They're more, like you said, that's exactly right. So far we've learned that, you know, there's a process in building your vocabulary up, and there's some work that everyone has to do, whether it be writing more, reading more, or being conscious of your filler words. I guess, what are some of your pet peeves when it comes to language or speaking in general?
Awesome.
Awesome.
Awesome is one for sure. Very. Uses of things that like very unique. People say very unique because they understand that unique is a good qualifier. It's if something's unique, it's already the only one of its kind.
If you had to give some advice for 3 things that someone can do today to really step up their vocabulary and become more of a wordsmith, what would those things be?
Well, we'll take it for granted that I would say come check us out, check out the wordsmithacademy.com and join us. That would be one thing, but that's my own, I'm my own business, so I'm not going to, that's not the only thing I'm going to say. Read more. Do what you can to read more. Everybody listening to me right now should have a library card. Everybody listening should have a goal to get some more reading into their life. Whether it's whether your goal can be to read one additional book a month. Make sure you start reading, and start reading in an intelligent way. Start with being curious about words. If you're in a position where you're listening to the news or you're listening to people's conversations around you, and you hear people use words that you don't recognize, if you don't feel comfortable asking them about what the word is, then just find a little way to write it down. Even if you don't spell it correctly, it doesn't matter, because Google has a way of just type it in Google and it'll offer you the spelling that's probably correct if you've gotten it wrong. And just curiosity about language and curiosity about how to describe things. I think that's one of the best things to cultivate, to ask questions.
Oh, it absolutely makes sense. I think it's really interesting because, we have a tendency, especially in conversation, to get intimidated when people use different words that are not of our everyday vocabulary or just words that we don't know. And I think that the best thing that people can do when they're in those situations is really listen to the context clues, just like they used to tell you in school when you were elementary, grade school, high school, whatever. They tell you, listen to the words around the words that they are using. A lot of the times, most of the time, if you are listening, truly listening to the person, you'll be able to pick up on the idea of the word or what the word might mean. There's not a lot of times that people use words that don't have the pretext to give you an idea of what it means. So I would advise people to add to what you were saying, to just, when you are in those situations where you are around people and you hear words that are maybe not familiar to you, if you don't feel comfortable asking, or saying, I'm not familiar with that word, just make sure you listen to the before and reflect on what they said, so that you can kind of come to a conclusion. And and I'm not afraid to say this, when I get in situations like that, I make a mental note right then and there. And I always go back and I always find out what that word was, because sometimes you'll find out that the word was not even appropriate for what they were saying.
They don't necessarily know what. So they might not know what their word meant either.
Mm-hmm.
So
very true.
That's why it's always good to check both on them and on yourself. I think it's a very wise thing to do. Is always to check. And the thing about I've been scraping my brain for synonyms that you could use instead of awesome or absolutely. You could have just some that are also like that cooking example I used. You could just say yummy. Okay, you could say heavenly. You could say priceless. You could say a bunch of different things. It's not because the thing when you're using awesome and absolutely, or a word that's being overused in the language, you start to sound like everybody else, and that's at the very moment where you don't want to sound like everybody else. You want to sound different. You want to use words like transcendent and chic and priceless and ambrosial, mouth-watering.
Wow.
All that kind of stuff. All these kinds of words.
Yeah, I was just going to say absolutely. And it's funny you should say that, because awesome is something that I use typically when I'm writing something as a response, or someone says, hey, this is going on. And I'm like, awesome, that's great. Or good job. It's just my immediate response. And absolutely is one of those words that I use when I'm really, when I'm listening to someone and I agree 100% with what they're saying. It just hits me just like that. So it's definitely something that I have to work on, and most people probably don't notice, but it's something that as a person in podcasting and a person in communications, I'm completely aware of. And so I think that I love to read. I read all the time, but I think the Wordsmith Academy is something that I'm really interested into looking into. And if you're listening to this podcast, make sure you check out the Wordsmith Academy as well, because it sounds like it can do nothing but help you. David, before we go, I really want you to give us, all your information. How can people find you, and really plug Wordsmith Academy, because the podcast is all about how you can kind of step up your game when it comes to your vocabulary. And I want people to really have a clear path to where to find you and where to find the Wordsmith Academy.
Well, the Wordsmith Academy is www.thewordsmithacademy, all one word, .com. And we're on Facebook at the Wordsmith Academy on Facebook. We're also on Twitter, the Twitter @ the Wordsmith ACA, and let's see, my email. The email that I use most often actually now is David at dreamloom or dreamloomcom.gmail.com. So that's dream, DREAM, LOOM, COOCOMM at gmail.com. And that's the parent company for Wordsmith Academy.
Great. David, I want to thank you so much for joining the Savvy and Professional podcast. And I want to encourage everybody to make sure you reach out to David and email him if you have any questions, or maybe there's a sentence that you need help with. I'm pretty sure he has no problem with helping you out. Thank you, David, for joining us. And I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and you have done an impeccable job. So fantastic.
Thank you. Don't you feel smart already just listening to that? Don't you feel like your vocabulary just went up a notch? Make sure you check out the websites mentioned in this show. And I also want to encourage you to follow us on Twitter, on Facebook. We're also on YouTube. Make sure you go to thesavvyyoungprofessional.com if you're looking for more episodes. And stay tuned for next week's show. See you later, YPs.